Welcome to the Connection Matters podcast. I'm your host, Leona Johnson. In this podcast, we explore the intricate weave of consciousness, empowerment, connection to the sacred, and cultural emergence. I believe that now, more than ever, we're being called to craft a new story, one of community, deep listening, creative potential, cultural repair, and an embodied understanding of the interconnected web of all things. Let's do the work together so that we can move forwards with authenticity and integrity, knowing that we're contributing to a healthy, regenerative culture for future generations. My mission with this podcast is to inspire and empower you to step into this vision for life. Each episode, I'll bring you thought-provoking conversations with leading voices in the field, but you'll also find solo episodes where I dive deep into my passion, connected self-leadership and everyday spirituality, giving you actionable tools to integrate into your daily life. Subscribe now on your favourite podcast platform if you haven't already, and if you enjoy the show, please share it with those who would appreciate it. It really helps when you do. You can also leave a review on Apple Podcasts to help others find us who might need that dose of hope and inspiration. Finally, to get notified straight into your inbox, feel free to sign up to the mailing list in the show notes below. This is also where I share weekly inspirational thoughts and any downloadable freebies that I talk about during the episode. My aim is to serve. I am so grateful that you are here. Good morning. Good morning, Deborah. Nice to see you.
Good morning, Leona. Good to see you too.
So we're here with Deborah Benham, and we've talked about having this conversation for quite a long time, quite a few years actually, but
probably, yeah.
Finally making it happen right now. We were just talking about it at some time in the last decade, possibly 10 or 9 years ago, at an Acorn leadership training with John Young at Embercombe. And it was at a time when I was starting to explore the model of the 8 shields and how we can create a more nature-connected culture. That was the question that I was sitting with and holding, and still do. And
me too.
Yeah, and I know that we've both been dancing in the same circles for quite a few years. So it's really lovely to have you here, finally.
Good to be here.
My question is, I guess to start with, what's alive in you right now? How are you? And yeah, where are you at?
Well, right now, this morning, I'm just feeling super grateful for the sun coming out and all the bird song that's happening as spring sort of gradually starts to unfold here in Dorset in the southwest-ish of England, which is where I'm based. And what's alive in me is really I've been really kind of reflecting on my own nature connection and nature connection practice the last week, basically, because this time last week I was in a really miserable place, actually. I was feeling really down, and I wasn't sure why, because things are going quite well at the moment, with home, relationship, work. And I was like, gosh, I'm really feeling sad. I'm really feeling irritable. I don't want to sit at my desk. I don't want to do any of my tasks, even though I'm working on some very cool projects at the moment. And I started fantasizing about, I have to change my whole life. I need to go traveling somewhere warm. I need to do loads more outdoor work somehow. Maybe I need to change my career. I can't be at a desk anymore. And it was all getting very dramatic in my head. And I think it was last Monday, actually, that'd be a week ago, that I had a big cry in the evening. I was just feeling really, really down. And I kind of sat with that for a couple of days and just got on with stuff. And a couple of days later, the sun came out for, 15 minutes between rain showers. It's been so wet here recently, I think, probably where you are too. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think, what's the statistic? We've had sort of 42 days of rain in a row or something in the UK. Yes. Wow, it's so wet. I mean, it's a little scary, actually. I think we're getting more rain than was predicted, or is normal for this time of year. But anyway, so the sun came out briefly. I went and sat outside on this bench up on the field behind my house, and it was like I took a massive sigh of relief. I started to hear the birds singing. I started to notice a couple of daffodils coming up. As I walked back through the really young fruit tree orchard that we have at the back of our co-housing, I saw the buds just beginning to swell, on the apple trees and the other fruit trees. And each time I noticed something like that, it was like I took a deeper breath and my shoulders fell more and I just started to expand. And I suddenly realized, like, oh, I'm not depressed. I just haven't had any nature connection for the last few weeks. I don't need to change everything. I just need to go outside. And it's so funny that as a nature connection practitioner this last 15 years now, that I can still fall out of the habit. For something as simple as persistent rain, And it was making me think about my dog, actually, who died about 3 years ago now. But I had her for 16 years. And that meant I went outside twice a day, every day. And, she liked to stop and explore things in the woods and sniff around. And so I'd stop and notice the birds and notice the bluebells and notice the hawthorn and all this kind of thing. And I had good gear, right? Because I lived in Scotland at that time and it did rain, often, although we had a lot of wonderful clear weather too, up in that northeast bit. So I had a really decent coat and really decent wellies or hiking boots. And so it didn't matter if it was wet because I had the right gear. And I noticed that since she died, I've still got that same coat, but it's not so waterproof anymore. And the wellies are a bit cracked and it just puts me off going through the puddles or going into the woods or, yeah. So it's just so funny. And also the easiest place for me to walk now is quite a steep hill. And it's wonderful when it's dry, but when it's wet, it gets quite treacherous to get up and down the paths. And that puts me off as well, right? So I'd just fallen into being inside too much. And once I noticed that these last few days, I've been going out as often as I can, and my mood has completely turned around. It's just that noticing the silly things in life that can disconnect us again, whether it's rain or a pair of cracked wellies. So I'm going to buy some new wellies, splash out on a decent coat. I bought that one probably 12 years ago. And get outside even if it's raining. That's what I need to do.
I totally hear you. It doesn't matter how much we intend to make sure that we go outside, knowing as nature connection practitioners that it's needed, knowing as we do now about how much research there is of the benefits of it on all levels, heart, mind, body and spirit, and at the same time persistent heavy rain and cold, we are wired for comfort, aren't we? We're wired for ease, and sometimes it's easier to stay indoors, but as you say, once it builds up and becomes this kind of period of time where we've not even been out and felt the breath of wind on our faces, it can feel like a real drag this time of year. And actually, it's a really magical time of year whenever we do have space to dream into the year in front of us. But it can be tricky. So thank you for sharing. And I think probably, what you're describing is what so many people are experiencing. And we've got both what's going on in the outside world and what's going on here in those of us who live in the Northern Hemisphere, of this kind of time where we're trying to just keep ourselves going and keep life ticking over. But the nature of being human is can sometimes be tricky. So I guess, so for many people who are feeling stretched and between no, I'm not going to go down there. I'm going to go to to how that relates to the work that you're doing in the world, because you said that you're working on some really interesting projects, and even despite those projects, you've been going through this funk. But I think that everything is nature connection and relating and community. And I'd love to hear about what you're working on.
Well, it's funny that as well, because you mentioned community and, the relational side of things with people as well there. And I think even that can disappear a little bit in the winter. I think traditionally we would spend more time together in the winter in many ways, get cozy, be inside doing crafts or projects or preserving food or whatever, right? And I think in kind of modern Western society, there can be that tendency to draw inwards into just our own homes or our own families or own relationships and be a little bit more isolated. And I certainly noticed that the last couple of months, that I just had this desire to be like on my own or just with my partner and my mum, my closest family, being cozy, doing a jigsaw, watching a movie, having a meal. And I wasn't seeing my neighbours as much. And I live in this incredible co-housing, right? And it's 53 homes. It's the biggest co-housing in the UK. And I feel incredibly privileged to live here. And when the sun comes out, and I really noticed this on Saturday, actually, just 2 days ago, everyone starts popping out their front doors and chatting on the paths. And we had this kind of little accidental 3 houses in a row, sort of doing a bit of weeding and tidying in our front gardens and chatting across the gardens. And there was a coffee morning yesterday, and I got to catch up with a few neighbours there. And it's amazing how that spiral of disconnection can continue, like not going outside, not bumping into the neighbours, staying in my closest little kind of like core family and not having that more expansive experience. And actually last Saturday, did the sun come out briefly? I think I cycled down to town, met someone for a coffee, and there was a seed library was being launched at our library where you can actually just go and take seeds, and then the encouragement is at the end of the year to bring some seeds back, right, and kind of restore the library. And those sorts of things are really uplifting, as well as the nature connection, the people connection is so important. So I think these last 2 weekends have slowly begun to feed that side of me too. And that's important because the projects that I really care about are about that relationship between people and the rest of nature, how we can once again, and I'm talking we, those of us that have been brought up in this kind of Western dominant, separated kind of illusion of separation kind of culture, how we can sort of once again become embedded in the webs of life, how we can become participants in our ecosystems and our places and our communities. And that's something I really, really care about, like you, this whole idea of nature connected culture and culture that emerges from connection with the land and with each other. So yeah, the projects I'm working on at the moment are a few different things. The biggest one, which is very exciting, but even the excitement for that I couldn't feel a week ago because it was a lot of tasks on the computer, is called the Living Systems Alliance. And that is something that I'm very privileged to do through my paid work, actually, through my day job. So I have a job with Transition Network International, which is the support charity for the international transition towns movement. Transition towns is how a lot of people know about it, but transition movement. Mm-hmm. And we are there to support community-led action around things like local food, local energy, biodiversity projects, community building, mutual aid. And we've got groups in, I think it's 60 plus countries now and over 1,500 groups. Yeah, and there's more than 350 groups just in the UK. And they're really active and they do amazing projects. And it's all very self-directed. We're not there to tell anyone what to do, but we provide guidance and educational materials, and we try and raise money to provide seed funding for projects and host webinars where groups can talk to each other about what they're doing and all that sort of thing. But I've been working there for 7 years now, and a lot of the work ended up being quite strategic and behind the scenes, which is super important, but it felt a bit dry for someone that's a marine biologist, wildlife guide, nature connection practitioner. I was starting to feel like my distance from nature-based work was getting too big. And so I was filling that gap with my freelance time, because that's just a part-time, it's quite a big part-time job, but it's a part-time job. And then I had this very fortunate experience to be talking about my freelance work in some of our strategy days. And all the team are kind of saying, yeah, but transition's based on permaculture, transition's based on learning from the land and living more lightly on the land. And we should be doing more of these living systems kind of projects and approaches. So let's explore that. And I started talking to the wonderful Andy Goldring from the Permaculture Association at an event we bumped into each other in Bristol. And he said something very sweet, which was that it feels like transition and permaculture are siblings that really love each other but don't see each other very often. And we've done lots of things together in over the past, but not for a while. So we said, well, why don't we do something together? Why don't we look at how we can bring living systems approaches even more into community-led action? And this relates to the whole kind of concept of bioregioning, right, which is kind of having a resurgence at the moment of how do we design with our place, with our region. So with transition, we talk about the neighbourhood level or the community level or the village or town level, the street level. And that's wonderful because that's a level that most people can engage with, right, and get to know people and do something meaningful. But what I think I'm realizing as a biologist and as a someone interested in regeneration and kind of creating thriving, healthy futures, is that we actually need to design at that regional level. We need to be thinking about the whole watershed. We need to be thinking about food production and materials and flows of energy and waste processing and all that sort of thing on a level that can meet everyone's needs. So that bigger level becomes really useful. So partnered up with the Permaculture Association. And then a couple of years ago, I think it was right at the end of the pandemic, I got accredited as a biomimicry educator. And I fell in love with biomimicry, which is all about reconnecting with nature, learning from nature, and then kind of like emulating nature's forms, processes, and systems to create kind of intrinsically life-affirming designs, whether that's the design of a product or a city. So you can take it to any level. So I was really thinking that was a useful set of tools and practices, and we were then very fortunate to have a chance to meet up with some folks from the Biomimicry Institute, and they joined the Alliance. And then we also invited our colleagues from the Global Eco Village Network, and we have a dear friend, colleague, and board member who is also the co-founder of Kincentric Leadership, looking at how we can lead from that kind of like deep connection with nature and treating all of the living world as kin, right? So we got together, we formed this thing called the Living Systems Alliance. And what's really fun about that name is none of us know where it came from. So we were having a meeting and at the end, we were like, so we're going to call it the Living Systems Alliance then. Yeah, that was a really great idea, Andy. It wasn't me. Anna, was that you? No, I thought it was Andy. Maybe it was you, Deb. No, it wasn't me. Jules? No. Manda? It wasn't me. So we don't know where the name came from. It just kind of emerged in a meeting. So yeah. So anyway, that's kind of the origin story of it. But what we're trying to do is to pool the knowledge of those movements with the communities that have been doing those practices for a number of years and create a toolkit and a learning journey for communities that want to reconnect with, learn from, and design as nature as part of their living systems. So we're going to be inviting 9 different communities to join us on that journey for a year and co-create this toolkit and experiment with it over that year. So that's the Living Systems Alliance, and that's my big project that I'm working on.
Oh, that is a big project. There's so much there. It's so exciting, and I'm really, so much richness. I can just imagine. I love that the little sibling metaphor that Andy named. I did a podcast with Andy. I think he was like my second ever podcast way back when, because I did my permaculture design training with him and Starhawk back in the day. But
wonderful. That's a good team.
It is a good team. It was a really great team. It was at an amazing eco village called Land Matters down in Devon. Nice, But yes, all of those organizations coming together to actually create something that is working with nature, working with the regional level. I mean, what for people who haven't been in the worlds of design and biomimicry, could you just share a little bit more about that and why it's useful? Why is it useful to work at that level?
Well, so here's an example, right? So as I said, biomimicry can be at the level of form, process, or system. And some people are probably aware of biomimicry and biomimicry-based design without even realizing it, because it can be all sorts of things like those bullet trains in Japan that have the very pointy front end. Those were designed based on the shape of a kingfisher's beak, so that they cut through the air, better, and they don't create noise and that sort of thing. Or if you think about what are some of the other famous ones? So there's like heating and cooling systems based on how termites build their nests, because they're often in very dry or desert environments where it's very cold at night and very warm in the day. But the way that they create the structures and the tunnels and all that sort of thing actually naturally kind of keeps it warm at night and cool in the daytime. And there are now buildings built using those forms and processes. But what really inspires me is biomimicry at a systems level, which I think is kind of the most holistic and sort of cutting edge expression of biomimicry, because this is where you would actually go and study how a forest works, for example, or a wetland or a kelp bed, just like an ecosystem that is healthy and thriving and providing all these different services and niches and flows of energy and sort of supporting, an ecosystem that is creating the conditions conducive to life, which is what we kind of say in biomimicry, that that's kind of like a healthy ecosystem or a healthy set of processes create conditions conducive to life. Life creates the conditions for life. So if you study how a forest works and you look at how energy is created and how energy is cycled and how it flows, and you look at this whole concept of waste, which isn't really a thing in a living system,
Mm-hmm. There is no bin.
There is no bin, it's like plants photosynthesize, they put carbohydrates into their bodies, eventually their bodies die or shed leaves that falls to the earth. Different organisms break that down into soil, compost, humus. That's food for the next set of plants. It's everything is food for something else or energy for something else. So we can look at those sorts of flows and we can say, what would that look like in a town or a city? What would that look like in a building or an organization? We can look, so you can then transfer those patterns and principles to like a whole human system. And this is happening. So there's an organization called Biomimicry 3.8, which is Janine Benyus's consultancy organization. She's the founder of biomimicry in many ways. She really kind of like popularized the term about 30 years ago and has done enormous work around it ever since, along with people like Dana Baumeister and others. And they work with some of the biggest companies in the world now to do this project called Factory Like a Forest, where they actually challenge companies like Ford or Google or Microsoft to design manufacturing plants or data processing centers that, instead of having these huge negative impacts on the environment, actually, instead of going for net zero, they go straight for net positive. So how can you capture carbon? How can you clean and capture and collect and clean and store and redistribute water? How can you create wildlife habitat? How can you create healthy recreational environments for the local community? How can you grow food, increase biomass, increase biodiversity? And businesses actually get quite excited about this, apparently, because there's that kind of intrinsic human desire to be contributing, be leading on something, be doing something innovative, to be seen as a good person. And whether that's for business reasons or human reasons, it's more attractive to our human psychology than giving things up, doing less, trying to do less harm. And so it seems to, inspire people's kind of engagement. And what I'm very excited about is transferring that to community-led action, right? So it's great that businesses are doing that. That needs to happen a lot more. But I love this idea that as communities, we could say, oh, okay, what's a healthy, thriving ecosystem near me? Whether that's, a fragment of Devon temperate rainforest or a vibrant piece of coastline or some really alive wildflower meadows. And we could look at what are all these, the technical term for it is ecosystem services, right? What are all these ecosystem services that are provided by this healthy environment? So water, air, food, habitat. How could how could we do something similar in our town or village? How much are we already doing? Oh, we've got local food project. Cool. Okay. Oh, we've got people that are doing some solar projects or some, wind turbines. Great. What are we doing about transport? How do we move people around sustainably? What are we doing about water? Like, water's a real issue here, and for many places in the UK, we're getting more and more in the winter and less in the summer. So how do we prevent flooding? Beavers, it's like what how can we capture the water and then move it around the land and store it for later in the year so it doesn't become an issue and be flooding our homes and businesses. So we can think about this whole system and regional level, and then we can figure out who's already doing what. And then we can say what are the major gaps and see, and that creates possibilities for new cooperatives or community projects or social entrepreneurs to be like, oh yeah, I could do something there. I could take the waste product from that business and turn it into something here that would be useful for the community. Or we could do a water capture project where we all get, water collection butts, and we all support the local landowners to get beavers and, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I just think it's really exciting at that kind of, to think at that design level. And I guess my vision is that every community would have people that have some of those regenerative design skills. Because when we deeply reconnect with nature and really have that felt sense of like nature as a mentor, nature as a source of guidance and wisdom for us in a very practical sense, as well as like an emotional or spiritual sense, and we use those design principles, and there are universal design principles in nature. That's another thing that biomimicry has done, is articulate these universal design principles of how life creates the conditions for life. So you can take those universal design principles, and then if you've got a few people that have those, in their back pocket, when you start to do community projects or work with your council, you can look at that design level, and then everything that you make is going to be intrinsically life-affirming, intrinsically regenerative, intrinsically healing to the community and the land, because you're using principles that come from nature that create life-affirming conditions. And so, there's this quote that's around that we can't solve the problems of today with the same thinking that created them. But that always begs the question for me, like, where does the thinking come from then, the new thinking? We can try, there's different ways to try and access our imagination and creativity. And we are a very creative species. And imagination is massively important, as the amazing Rob Hopkins, talks about, and is, runs all these fantastic visioning and imagination workshops, which I also highly recommend for any communities that want to do something like that. But the actual kind of pathways and principles, we don't have to try and make them up. They are there in the living world all around us. And sometimes we want to look to traditional or indigenous communities because they have retained a lot of those knowledge and practices, right? And that's wonderful, where we have the opportunity to uplift their work and uplift voices of communities that still know how to do that, still know how to look after the land and steward the land in a healthy way. But we don't always have access to those people, or they may be busy, with their own projects and agendas and activism and so on. And so it can be really great to learn how to restore our own ecological knowledge, our own ecological awareness. And for me, I think that starts with nature connection, because if we just go at it from a head place and kind of go into nature with this almost like a intellectual or extractive kind of point of view of like, right, what can I take from nature in terms of learning? It can easily, I feel firstly we're going to miss things because we're not going in like fully open. And also we may be coming from a narrow place, if you know what I mean, or kind of like an enculturated place. Mm-hmm. But because you and I have been on this deep nature connection journey, we've experienced. Let me go back to talking about my dog, actually, because I had her for 6 years before I encountered John Young's work and the deep nature connection work. And I'd done a degree and a master's and a PhD in biology by that point. And I would say I was not nature connected. I loved nature passionately, but only parts of nature. So my mum will often reflect on, you were all about the charismatic, fluffy stuff and the marine mammals and, otters, dolphins. I was a marine biologist for many years, so that was my area. But I didn't pay that much attention to birds or plants or forests. And if I was out walking, I was probably mostly up in my own head, having conversations with people or planning things or thinking about stuff. And I might enjoy a beautiful view and get the benefit of being outside, the exercise, the greenery. But I don't know if I was really aware. I don't know if I was really paying attention. And I didn't notice what was happening around me with the smaller animals or with the birds or with the plants or with the seasons that much. I was a city girl originally, and I went to living more rurally in 2005 when I got my first job up in Scotland. And it wasn't until I started doing regular nature connection practice, whether that was sit spots, just going to the same place every day and sitting and just noticing what was happening around me gently. Something for me that's been really important is doing sensory meditations. So it's almost like I'm sure people have talked about this previously on your podcast, but just, opening all 5 senses in nature, not being so visually dominant, starting with what can we hear, what can we feel the breeze on our cheek, all these sorts of things, what can we smell? And then staying in that expanded sensory awareness as we travel through the landscape, as well as we wander or go off the path or interact with a tree or get down close to the ground and smell something or touch the dew on a plant, or look at the light on a blade of grass. It all expands our awareness. And when we expand our awareness, there's all this neuroscience that show that we drop into a different state. We literally drop more into the right brain, the creative, the regulated nervous system, the anxiety and stress hormones decrease. And we're able to pay better attention. We're able to access more of that, what's it called, like the default network?
Default mode network.
Yeah. So it's like things are integrating and making sense and having new insights. And so there's all these kind of neuroscience and nervous system kind of reasons why when we do nature connection and fully drop into our full sensory awareness, that we become better observers. We start to feel that sense, like a felt sense of interdependence. We're like, oh yeah, I'm literally breathing with the trees. Like that's where the oxygen's coming from. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I'm walking on this soil. Oh, the birds fly away from me when I walk fast and busily. But if I sit somewhere for 10 or 15 minutes, they'll come back and gather around me and I can listen to them chatting to each other and singing and doing their business like they were up there after I sat still for a few minutes. So all of this is super healthy for us, obviously, like it's really good for our nervous system, but it also helps us access creativity, and it also helps us be better observers and notice more. And then that can lead to those, that's how I could solve that problem. That would be an inspiration for this thing I'm trying to design. Mm-hmm. And then we can actually go out with a little bit more intentionality. We can start to blend our nature connection with design, right? We can go out with a question in our mind of like, how does nature solve the problem of too much water? I'm going to go for a wander today, and I'm just going to notice how water moves on the landscape and think about that.
All of that. I mean, to me, the biggest thing that comes from, I think one of the biggest problems is that we feel separate. So all of the things that you described of taking ourselves out and into nature and sitting and being there helps us drop into that place of embodied awareness that enables us to realize, like really realize, that word real, realize that we are actually part of and not separate, and we're not just looking at and thinking from that body. We are intrinsically part of everything, and that, I think, is what helps us to feel belonging. And when we feel belonging, we feel purpose, we feel connected to wanting to be part of and help and co-create with life, rather than do to and start and do it from this place. But I know as the same as you, whenever I started this journey, I would have said that I was a nature connected person, because I did go for walks often, and I would, I would meet up with friends. We'd drive and meet somewhere in a car park. We'd get out and then we'd talk, all the way through the walk and then talk all the way back again and get in our cars and leave. And it was only when I started this journey, it was when I did my eco-psychology training, that I, for the first time, really went alone into nature for any significant period of time. And I allowed myself to just feel all the feelings that come whenever you sit still. Sometimes boredom, sometimes why am I even here? Sometimes, come on, nature. I thought if I did a sit spot, I would see some amazing things. You know, I had this really extractive mind, which I didn't understand, kept me separate. And it was only after doing a sit spot every day for a year as part of my eco-psychology training that I realized and felt and understood life completely differently by the end of that year. And so for me, you know, I find it fascinating to continue to do that. And every time I go back to nature, for the same reasons as you described right at the beginning of the podcast, sometimes it's a while before I go again. And every time I go back, I go, why didn't I do this last week? Why didn't I do this? You know, the big walk that helps process all the thoughts and helps me be re-inspired. And there's the internal process of, you know, physiologically we need time and space to actually organize our thoughts and feelings and emotions and things that have happened to us. And then the sort of external interrelatedness of knowing the time of the year and feeling that and experiencing that and understanding the difference that comes through shadow and light and times of day and the cycles and the way that the wind feels when it's coming from that direction and how different it is when the weather comes from that direction. You know, all of these things that become known to us that we could learn from a head perspective, but when we know it from an embodied perspective, we understand life differently. I think it's super powerful and deep. But my question is, how do you know, based on the fact that we've chosen a life and path of nature connection, how do you relate to people of organizations? How does this work with people who haven't necessarily been called to or understand and had these processes? And how do you get people from that place of thinking that it would be a good idea to embodying and then planning and making a difference, you know, in their communities from that embodied level?
I mean, I think fortunately more and more people are aware of what we might call the polycrisis or the metacrisis, right? The kind of interconnecting crises of climate change, loss of biodiversity, habitat breakdown, social injustice and social unrest, and that these things have root causes that are interrelated. And I think more and more people are beginning to recognise the value of what are sometimes called nature-based solutions, right? Or whether that, or rewilding or agroecology. It's like these things are surging and becoming more widely known as pathways away from the edge of the cliff. So I think there's the awareness is there in enough people for us to work with now, whether that's a local council or an organisation that's trying to be like future fit or, you know, longer term sustainable in their processes. I think we don't need to necessarily be super kind of like, you must come and do all this nature connection, you must have a daily practice. We can say, come and learn how to learn from nature, come and, you know, learn how to develop more well-being in your team, or more creativity or innovation, or more solutions that will make you long-term sustainable. And then we can weave in nature connection practices. And you kind of have to have an experience of something to get it. We often talk about, I mean, John Young's organisation now is called Connection First for a reason, right? If we talk about connection a bunch like we're doing today, that might land for people that already get it a bit, have had an experience of it. It's really, we can tell stories of connection to kind of help people remember, like, oh yeah, connection is important. It does feel wonderful when I sit outside my tent quietly in the morning with a cup of tea when I'm camping before all the family busyness happens. That actually feels amazing. I feel so different when I have that moment of connection, or when I have a deep connection with my friends, or, you know, something like that. But giving people an experience of connection first is super important. So if we can just gather people for whatever reason, then if we go and do that quiet time in nature, we do that sensory experience, we go and sit quietly and give people the opportunity to drop into that more regulated nervous system place and start noticing and observing and getting curious, then I think people start to notice the potential of that anyway, because they realize, oh, I'm seeing things differently, I'm having different ideas. Oh, there must be something in this regular practice stuff. And I do think that regular practice is amazingly important. And of course, we can forget when it's raining for 42 days, as we were talking about. But what's so important is remembering, starting again, right? Getting back to it. And and I think like any practice, a mindfulness practice or a exercise practice or a nutrition practice or, anything like that, it is a practice to return to and to just make a habit. And I think once people realize the benefits, and there is so much science now. I mean, I spoke at the Nature Connection conference last year, so it gave me a really good opportunity to review the literature. And it's amazing, actually, that the Nature Connection academic kind of and research field is really burgeoning at the moment. So I think the statistics is something like 75% of all the papers published have been published in the last 5 years. And that just wasn't around 15 years ago and 10 years ago when you and I were just diving deep into the beginning of our Nature Connection journey. I couldn't find much research. There was some on well-being and sort of physical and mental health. But now there's research on how it helps people be more pro-social. There's more research on how it really does lead to more environmental awareness and attitudes and behaviours and action. There's research that shows how being nature connected affects our microbiome positively. It's like our physical health at that level. So there's a great review, which I've got right by me here, by Zelensky et al. In 2023, where they talk about nature connection as a pathway to personal and planetary health. And that's an amazing paper to get your hands on. It's open source, so you can download it. It's not behind any paywalls or anything. And, it talks about all those different levels. But there's also research out there that shows that nature connection can quickly atrophy again, right? Because we're not always used to having it as a regular practice. It can dissipate. So we need to find ways to bring it in regularly, whether that's having buddies or a community that we do it with, or just getting into a habit of it and reminding ourselves that it's important. Because if we don't do it regularly, we can lose that felt sense of connection. We can lose that creativity. We can lose that nervous system regulation. So it's having a practice and doing it often for anyone. And I think we have to remember that people in organisations and businesses and council are people too. They have families. They do care about the future. They want their kids to have a decent life in the future. They want green space and clean air and clean soil and clean water. And if we can just talk in simple language that cuts across the political differences or the ideologies and just talk about like human needs, and what most of us need at a basic level, which is like a decent environment, decent healthcare, a community of people that support us. I noticed this in my co-housing and in my local town. It's like you really can work with probably a lot more people than you think you can if you come at it from that level. And actually nature is a great connector, because most people do care about having a nice outdoor environment, whether that's might be for different reasons. They might feel that there's different ways to get there. But actually, when some things can be more political, nature and green space is actually quite a good cross-cutting kind of aim for most people.
And what you said about at the beginning, there was a feeling of lack of nature connection, but also lack of people connection. We really need both. And yes. One is not separate from the other. We're
social species.
We're social species. And actually, one of the things that is part of the crisis of our times is the fact that we are very separate. Lots of people work from home in organisations that meet online, but they don't really meet in person anymore. And
including me,
and that in itself has a very has an effect that helps us is the wrong word, but makes us feel separate. And actually all of the things that you're describing, having that awareness of bringing people together in nature, which is just naturally brings almost everyone who arrives into a group together in nature that's held well, into a place of more regulated, open awareness.
You've just reminded me of something that happened last year. So the co-housing I live at is relatively new. We've only been here between, I think the people that have been here the longest have been here 3 years. We've been here just over 2 years. And so we're still getting to know each other, and we're still getting to know this piece of land. And one evening last summer, I think it was early summer, I drove back, and it was quite late at night. So it was long days, it was kind of somewhere around the summer solstice, but it was just getting to be dusk. I think it was about 10:30 at night. And I parked the car, and the headlights were still on, and the headlights were pointing up into the meadow behind the house. So there was a lot of long grass that we let grow there. And I could see these strange shapes moving, and they were kind of doing this kind of movement. It was kind of like an up and down kind of movement. And I was like, what is that? It literally looks like something on a piece of string that you would dangle for a cat, like this.
Yeah.
And I really couldn't figure it out. So I got out the car, and in the dusk I could still, turned the lights off, crept out the car and stood there. And it was like a moth, a big white moth, and there were hundreds of them, and they were moving in this way that I've never seen moths doing, this very strange, like up and down kind of bobbing on a string way. And I was absolutely enchanted, and I stood there for a while, and it was like fairies dancing over the grass. And so I put something on the neighborhood WhatsApp, like, God, come and see what's happening on the field at the moment. And just gradually, like, people came out their houses with their, kids that were still awake, or just like people popping out, and we all stood there watching it. And it became this thing for the next whole week. So what we discovered is this is called, they're called ghost moths. And they're really quite rare, and they only, will appear over certain types of grassland and meadowland where it's quite diverse. And it's this whole mating thing going on. The males are kind of like doing this kind of dance, and the females are on the grass, and then occasionally the female will flutter up as well. And it is utterly magical. And it became this whole community thing to come out, and it happens from earlier in the evening too. So the littler kids started coming out over the next few evenings too, and we'd all just stand kind of really quietly or in silence. We're like, and I kind of know now that that's going to become a thing in our neighbourhood, that every year there'll be like the season of the ghost moth, where we gather outside maybe with a cup of tea and we watch the ghost moths dance. And it's just like, how magical is that? That's how culture can arise from nature connection. Mm-hmm. Like, we've got our own little ghost moth ceremony or celebration or like moment now of the year. I really hope they come back this year and that happens. Mm-hmm. And and things like that have been happening here. Like, people will spontaneously say, oh, it's this Celtic festival, let's have something out on the, let's have something out on the meadow, or let's we had like, a big kind of food celebration for the harvest, or let's go and wassail the young apple trees we've got. And it's so like all these wonderful people connection activities are arising from this piece of land that we are stewarding. It's literally a community land trust, so we have to look after it. And so suddenly we're having this opportunity to bring people together. And this isn't an intentional community. This isn't a bunch of people that were already nature connected or already into this stuff. This is a bunch of local people that wanted affordable, safe, low energy housing where it was safe for their kids to play out on the paths, And so there's a lot of different people here, and not everyone was into this stuff before, but it's a rising out of the opportunity to gather in that way and look after this little piece of land. So it's pretty wonderful. Sorry, I'll let you go, and then I'll,
No, carry on.
Well, it's just that as we've talked, because I'm aware we haven't got a lot more time, I'm noticing that we have been touching on, it makes sense because it's me and you talking, but we've been touching on a number of the things that I've noticed go together very well, right? So we were talking about deep nature connection a lot. And one of the things I've noticed with deep nature connection, and John and, a lot of practitioners in nature connection talk about this, is it can bring up that sensitivity and empathy and sometimes grief, right? Because we become more connected, we feel a part of the living world, and then we feel the pain that's being inflicted on the living world by our culture and our, some of our economy, the way we extract, the way that we put waste into the environment, in the decline of species and habitats, and that can feel immensely painful. And we do often see and feel lit up to do something about that, right? We have that internal fire or motivation to do something, but we don't always know what to do. And that was one of the things that led me to the design side of things, to the nature-led design. And to also, there's more and more work around deciding with nature as well, right? Nature on the board, the rights of nature, yes. Really listening to the land. What does the land want? What does the land know? What can the land tell us about what would work here in this context? Mm-hmm. So I feel like the whole like reconnection is one part, listening to the land being our mentor, and like designing and deciding as part of nature, as part of our ecosystems, as part of our places. That's part of the puzzle too, because that gives the answer to, well, what now? How do we address this? So, and that gives a sense of agency to that sense of motivation. I have motivation. Oh, now I have some sense of what to do about it. And then within that, there's a spectrum where everyone can probably find something to do. Whether you want to do nature-based art, or whether you want to facilitate nature connection, or whether you want to design or do architecture or advocacy, or it's like there's every possible way of contributing within that system. And so, yeah, for me, it's like connect with nature, learn from nature, design as nature, and then don't do it on your own. Because when we try and do things on our own, as we talked about earlier, it's like constant striving, the hero's journey. I've got to save this. It's such a burden, and none of us can shoulder these times or these challenges on our own. And I know I've tried so many times. Still sometimes think, oh, I'll find the magic lever, the magic button that will make everything okay. And these are the stories we've been told, right? But actually we need to do it together. We need community for joy and solace and, all that stuff. But we also need it because we all see things differently. We all have different skills. We all have different contributions. We all have different gifts. And we need that whole package, if we're going to be able to address these multifaceted solutions, multifaceted crises with good pathways and solutions. And then we also talked about imagination and creativity, because if we can't see a future that we're excited about, and we can't think about those common needs of like, what can we agree on? What can we gather around? But if we can get that down, if we can get excited about like, yeah, we want healthy green space, and we want great local food, and we want the kids to be able to play outside safely, and we want to have a sense of support in our community, and like we've got each other backs in hard times. If we can agree on those things, then we've got a vision we can work towards, even across other differences. And then I think that final piece is that remembering piece, remembering that we are participants in the living world. We're not a plague, we're not a blight. We have gone off course in Western dominant culture. It's not actually that old. Couple of hundred years, couple of thousand years, depending on how you look at it. It's not everyone. There's plenty of communities around the world that don't live the way we live, that have stewarded lands and biodiversity, that do retain practices that are connective. We can be inspired by them. We can certainly uplift and support what they're trying to do. And we can rebuild that into our own lives and communities. We can be keystone species in our communities again, positive keystones. And I mean, I love Lila June's work, Dr. Lila June. She talks about, how humans can be regenerative. And we see that in indigenous communities, but we also see it in agroecology, in rewilding, in permaculture. It is surging in other places as well. And there's somewhere for everyone to plug in with that.
So I imagine in your world, because you're mixed, because you're part of all of these different organizations and you have these connections, you see projects of people coming together and doing great things.
I do. I'm very fortunate in that way. Yeah, I mean, the cohousing movement's amazing for building community and community land trusts. It's very exciting in the UK to see how much rewilding is gathering momentum. And I think there were beaver reintroductions across Devon, Dorset and Cornwall just this weekend. I've got neighbours who work in agroecology and the Land Workers Alliance and things like that, and they tell me what's happening with market gardening and we've got local food projects here. I mean, just in Dorset, it's amazing. There's a Dorset COP that's been going for 3 years now. I went this year for the first time, and there was something like 25 different organisations there and 300 or 400 people just, talking about all the different projects just happening in Dorset. And I think a lot of people, if you are busy, as understandably so, busy with life, with family, with the mortgage, with work, you don't maybe realise how much there might be already happening in your area. But, the transition movement, at least 1,500 groups, and those are just the ones that are kind of like registered with us or with international hubs. Lots don't even get registered. They just do their own thing locally. There's loads of groups that don't call themselves transition, but are doing transition-y things. I also get a newsletter called Fix the News, and it's kind of part of my mental health program because I get it every week. It's a couple of journalists from Australia who look very internationally in all sorts of different media sources, all reputable ones, and academic journals to media to publications. But they look at what's happening all over the world in countries that our mainstream media doesn't tend to report on. Learn about what's happening in the Philippines, in Colombia, in Ecuador. It's like Indonesia. It's like Kenya, Uganda. Yeah. We don't get all this news, but there are incredible projects happening everywhere, often led by communities.
Yeah, so powerful, so needed. And I think, that's where this in-breath and this out-breath is so important, to be able to surround yourself with people or podcasts or books or stories about what's going on that is actually uplifting and contributing to the world in a way that helps you feel like there are good things happening. And then this kind of personal practice and choice about who are, how are you choosing to show up for yourself, and then how are you choosing to show up for your family and your community and be part of these things that are going on, or to create them where they aren't. So for someone who is listening and feeling kind of inspired after, sometimes not feeling so inspired, what would you suggest, or what would you recommend?
I mean, there's so much out there, and I'm certainly not naive about the place we're in right now in the world. This is a scary and important time, and I'm not pretending it's not, and I'm not pretending it's all going to be okay. But I do think there are an amazing array of opportunities for us to reconnect and get involved and contribute in a way that feels meaningful and manageable for us. Which is why I think this community or regional level of scale is really important. It's important partly because it's accessible, but it's also important because it's absolutely necessary, and it really makes big impact. You don't have to be working at like a big organizational or big political level to have big ripples. You really don't. So I very much encourage people to get involved at that community or regional level. Find out what community groups are happening around you, and get involved with one that speaks to you, whether that's arts and storytelling or food growing or composting or habitat restoration, tree planting, whatever it is. Those things really matter. And then if you're someone that likes joining people up, you can get involved in more of that design level or strategy level, or gathering people, to look at how do we create the future we want for this community. So there's something for everyone to get involved with. And then in terms of other things for sources of inspiration, I really recommend Fix the News. Their newsletter is wonderful for knowing what's happening globally. I'm going to be running a course with the Biomimicry Institute next month called Restoring Your Ecological Awareness. And we're going to be really exploring what we talked about earlier in the podcast of like, how do we develop that practice of deep nature connection? What are those core routines of connection? And how do we bring them into our life in a regular way? And how do we remind ourselves to return to them if we forget? And also then, how does that link to learning from nature? How does it link to that biomimicry part of nature becoming our mentor, our guide, being able to connect with the patterns and principles? So if that sounds like something that might support you, you'd be super welcome to join. I really recommend, checking out resources on Transition Network International's website. We've got hundreds of free resources for groups that are doing projects locally, and all sorts of free webinars and stories of other groups that are doing cool stuff. It's all free. The Biomimicry Institute has a massive array of fantastic resources. They have something called the Ask Nature database, where you can look up all these different nature-based practices, principles. You can say, like, how does nature make homes? How does nature, create healthy environments? How does nature deal with waste? And it will come up with all these incredible examples from nature that are grounded in science, super inspiring, and you can like translate to your own context. There's resources for teachers and educators on there. If you want to learn a bit more about biomimicry, there's a super affordable self-guided course from Learn Biomimicry. And I think there's quite a big discount for educators on there as well. And people that do youth work and so on. So there's so much out there to be inspired with and connect to. Rob's new book is pretty fantastic, and he's doing all sorts of interesting talks and events coming up over the next year. So I mean, I think there's a lot to plug into.
So much. And it feels like, it's needed more than ever. It's something that we're all looking for. Most of us are longing to be part of something that helps us to shine our gifts into the world and just, know that we're part of the goodness of human nature. And
and of course, there's Nature Culture Camp coming up this summer.
There is, yes.
There is. So that's an opportunity to spend a whole 6 days out on the land doing nature connection practices and being in community and singing songs and eating great food. And it's all ages welcome. So there'll be like a super family vibe going on and elders. And so that's going to be fabulous as well. Teen camp as well. So that's going to be fabulous. And I think, so that's another opportunity to embed into these practices. And if people like the way that I brought those strands together, the kind of connect with nature, learn from nature, build community, the vision of a thriving future, and the keystone species thing, I've got a little framework called Becoming Ecological Citizens. It's on my website, which is just www.deborahbenham.com at the moment. And it's on there, it's Creative Commons. You can, be inspired by that framework or use it to kind of guide what you're doing if that's helpful. And you can drop me a line if you want to talk about anything that we've talked about today. Or you think there's an opportunity to do something fun together. So
I love this. I'll put I'll put these links in the show notes, and I guess you're a voice of inspiration, Deborah. It's been really great to speak to you.
Thank you.
I have one final question.
Okay.
If you could leave listeners with one orienting question to take into their next walk outdoors,